I actually completely forgot to write an intro to this review, so I'm going to completely ad-lib it. So Death Battle did Martian Manhunter vs Silver Surfer, a matchup that I don't like. I don't really like the Silver Surfer all that much. He sucks. I mean, he doesn't suck, he's too good. How can I take a story seriously when a guy sees all of time as basically it's like Dr. Manhattan, but if you were supposed to take him seriously as a superhero, as opposed to as a deconstruction of superheroes, you know? Like, if they try to tell a dramatic story with dramatic stakes as to whether or not Dr. Manhattan can beat someone in a fight in, like, a comic. Which I guess they did do, and not everyone was happy about that. What was it, Doomsday Clock? I don't give a shit. Martian Manhunter, though, I love Martian Manhunter, so I wanted to get something out of this episode. That being, I wanted to see the Martian Manhunter. So that's cool. So, how was the episode in the end? You can tell I didn't script this. Martian Manhunter's analysis is fine. It's fine. I think it covered his abilities fairly well, but I have a few qualms with the story integration. Personally, it kind of felt like there was a bit more of a harsh cutoff point between story and verses as opposed to most other death battles. We start with story, and then immediately after he gets teleported, we get sidetracked into talking about his insane abilities, even though some of them, like the regeneration, will get restated later. We then get back into the story, then suddenly it's powers for the rest of the analysis until like the last 30 seconds, where they bring up not just the ending of his story, but the beginning, middle, and end of his big story arc, all in one go. It's hard to explain my issue here, but to me, most Death Battle analyses that tackle these sort of character arcs tend to establish the beginning, then go through their rundown, development in their powers, their storylines, and then end with the end, as opposed to doing the beginning and end with nothing in between as like a quick plot synopsis thrown in there. Sometimes I don't do this, but it works anyway because there's a very smooth transition. Ant-Man, I think, directly ties on from them talking about his accomplishments with his mind and how they culminate into Ultron, who has direct ties to his character arc, which is a really good, smooth transition from feast to story. Manhunter just has Boomstick going, oh man, to think there's a whole race of them. And that's the connecting tissue. I don't know, Manhunter is good from a versus perspective, but the whole story aspect felt kind of entirely crammed into the end there. I think the connecting tissue of his telepathy being strong enough to keep souls from moving on would have been better to use as the transition. Establish how he's the last Martian earlier, like he got teleported and that helped him survive the end of the Martians or whatever, then talk about his telepathy feats and then how it stopped everyone from moving on, then let the shoe drop on the other foot by revealing exactly why that feat exists with his dead family and all. But I did find some of the jokes actually amusing, so points for that. The Mixie bit was actually kind of entertaining, not for the overused I don't know how to pronounce Mixie-Spitalik joke, but because of the way it wraps back around with the whole I don't even know how to fucking say it forwards, I don't know how to fucking say it backwards, and Boomstick just giving up. That's amusing. And Service Analysis also had a joke that I liked. The Death's Door bit was amusing, if mostly for the Jean Grey doormat, that's fucking great. I actually enjoyed a decent amount of the visual gags, actually, I want to say. I am a sucker for a good sudden pop vinyl jump scare. I enjoyed the visual gags way more than the cutaway gags. I'm going to be real. If we do not get Light Yagami vs. Columbo this season, please be what the suit is, I beg of you. Sorry, Kiradachi fans. But at least you're going to get Kira if I'm right. I'm going to be very upset that the cutaway gag with Boomstick pretending to be a surfer was not instead on Manhunter's side and a cutaway with Boomstick pretending to be Columbo because of the detective thing. That would have gone hard. Fittingly though, Surfer comes off as significantly more boring in his analysis than Manhunter. Yes, I like a good moral conundrum, but to me at least, who knows something about the comics, I can't feel bad about the Zen-La thing where, I mean, half of these were his fault. Like the 4 times they bring up, one time was the other doing it, and then Galactus immediately undid it and erased Manhunter, erased Surfer's memory. Another time was Surfer when he gave up on being Galactus' herald. Galactus went to destroy his planet, and then Surfer did not do anything to try to prevent it at all. And then one time it was like a simulation thing, and then he undid it and it was all fine. And then the last time, Surfer himself erased their culture, and that one's all on him. It's hard to really get into the story when I know that context. It's not as interesting as Manhunter being so grief-stricken that he had to shapeshift himself into the visage of his dead family to gaslight himself into thinking they're still alive, just so he doesn't have to suffer the unbearable pain of having seen them die before his eyes. One of those is a lot more dramatic and impactful as opposed to, yeah, I mean, his Surface planet gets destroyed a lot, but, you know, it keeps coming back, so that's probably good that it's been destroyed 4 times, because it just keeps coming back anyway. Other than that, surface analysis was whatever. Honestly, a lot less interesting overall. And then there's the editing. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm too lazy to look, I believe that the same person who edited this also edited also edited Gene vs. Raven. Speaking of editing, thank you to everyone who complimented my editing for that Marvel vs. DC video. I thought it would just be fun to do like those transitions. Anyway, and the editing for this episode is a step up from their last, if I'm correct. Now, I doubt any of my criticisms would have had any impact on that, even if the editor had watched my last review, just because I would not be surprised if most of this editing was already done before my review came out. But this is a very welcome improvement. It still has the same issues of large panels and honestly kind of shitty quality panels, but I know from experience that's unavoidable sometimes. That's not a criticism, except to the people who scan comic pages, but they are giving us comics for free online, so, you know. Overall, I would call this a big step up. There's more playing with the panels, and yeah, there are some issues with how some things were cut out, and there's some leftover noise around the images, but it's okay. People can only strive to get better, and this is better from last time. If they continue to improve like this, I have no doubts that I'll have little to complain about with the editing next time. For now, I probably won't bring up too many flaws, as anything I have to say is just, this is something in Phoenix vs. Raven, but it's less of a problem this time. Yeah, the background being blurred out comic pages is significantly more interesting than the stock Death Battle background. As for the fight, I gotta know, is the beginning a result of Columbo brain rot, or am I the one suffering that now? Have I gotten in on the joke without wanting to? The start is amazing, and kinda makes the rest of the episode a little worse, if that makes sense? Because start in this noir style, black and white is, well, okay, I gotta point out quickly, the sprites do look a bit awkward, but that's whatever, that's not important. The film grain, the like Twilight Zone style intro overall, and the card, or at least vibe like Twilight Zone. I haven't watched an episode of that series in years, but the box floating in the middle of space is very Twilight Zone-y. Is so neat and unique and looks great. The narrative kind of confuses me though. The fight is a bit meta, and that's weird. I don't know why that was done for these two exactly, but I'm unsure. Why did Surfer summon Manhunter? How did he do that anyway? Like, what does John mean by summon? Was it like magical portal summoning, or in the sense of sending him a message to come? The fact that this looks like a detective's office would seem to imply that Manhunter actually should have been here first, but if this is like a location in DC Comics that's like an office of his, I don't believe they mentioned it. And then Manhunter tries to rudely probe his mind, and Surfer's just like, enough! And leaves. But you're the one who summoned him. This is some Season 3 Flash kind of shit. But the vibe and style of the beginning would be enough to overlook that entirely if it didn't immediately stop. Now, I know some people wouldn't have wanted an all black and white animation, but I think at least keeping a more muted coloration or some film grain to keep it looking unique and less like the last two Marvel vs. DC flashy bright colors everywhere fights would have gone a long way to give this animation a unique identity we haven't seen in one of these fights yet. At the very least, some added grain effect might have made it look kinda like it was leaping straight off of a 60s comic, which would have been very unique as a look, and kind of fit in as a transition from the Twilight Zone sort of style vibe. And as it is visually, it's just kind of a very bog-standard Marvel DC episode that happens to be in space. Like, yes, it looks nice, absolutely, but that's the standard for Death Battle in general, and not just Marvel DC, all their episodes tend to look nice. They did try some different kind of shots, which was nice. First-person shots and top-down shots aren't the most common, but they really work in this case. I think Surfer kind of fits both, especially with his video game, the top-down one just works. But I think the overall look of the fight is a lot more standard, both than what I expected from the intro, and from how people propped up the unique visual potential of the mashup as a key part of its appeal. But with how standard it looks, the fight's not without cool moments. As I said, those two shots are neat, and this one bit of rigging is simply mwah, beautiful, and it deserves to fuck. I absolutely give this rigging my consent. And Manhunter snapping the board is just framed really cool with how, like, not only is it a big oomph moment, like, it looks cool, but it also leads you to think he's going into his true form, only to immediately hit you with the whammy of Dragon. Speaking of which, clawing the planet in the back, that was really fucking cool as well. And the kill is neat, but again, I don't get why this was the one to do this. Surfer being sad about killing John is neat. I like the tear, I like the idea of him killing the star with John. It looks really cool. These planets, I hope, weren't inhabited, but I'm very confused. I appreciate and like the attempt at a characterful ending, with John saying he hopes Surfer can live with it, and Surfer's monologue about it fitting his character, and calling back to Wiz even outright bring up that he does that a lot. But it's like they address the issue with characters who wouldn't kill killing by just saying, okay, but they have a reason to, that's the reason is they have to, which feels strange. I would have probably found it more interesting if the beginning established that the two were investigating what was happening. Like, say they established that they cannot leave this area, and then they just start fighting, and the end it reveals that they both came to the simultaneous realization that they have to fight and only one can live. Maybe that's what they were actually going for with the intro, possibly, and I just didn't pick up on that. If that's the case, cool concept, but I'm not sold on the execution of it. The ending does bring back the Twilight Zone sort of vibe, and it just reminds me of how different I would have liked the fight's visual style to be. I do appreciate that them knowing all this shit somehow through the magic of science does lead to John giving up, essentially. And normally, giving up is not something I like in a death battle, but in this case, the idea of Martian Manhunter sacrificing himself so the Surfer may live, at least that's what I assume happened, that's kind of how it's framed, really works for me. I really like it. For as confusing as it is, the more you think about it and the logic behind it, I really appreciate and like the characterful ending to the fight. It went for something new, and I quite enjoyed it. In the end though, this is kind of a completely standard run-of-the-mill Marvel DC flying brick fight with a really cool opening and a really unique ending. I really don't know what else to say. Most of the fight is flying and lasers. It's rigged really nice, it looks really good, the voice acting is... it's alright on surface end. I think Paul Guyot did a decent job for their debut, I hope that's how it's pronounced. I bumped my mic. Did a good job, and look, Surfer's a guy with a pretty boring sounding voice, so if anyone was to criticize them for sounding bored, that's Silver Surfer. He comes with a board. And Cameron Nicard does an actually exceptionally good job capturing Martian Manhunter. No bad performances in this fight, both sounded good, the sound design overall was very solid, the music was very good. I think Mind Over Matter had the tone that I wish the fight overall had and the right vibe and aesthetic. It's neat, but I haven't listened to it on its own yet. It's just, what exactly is there to talk about? There's nothing inherently bad. There's nothing like really wrong with the fight, I'll give it that. I have nothing really to say, and that goes for criticisms too. Aside from some of the sprites looking a bit flat and awkward in shots, which is balanced out by the times they look dynamic and cool, I appreciate the clash in mental powers, but for the most part, the fight was just John using telepathy and then getting noped, and then Surfer uses telepathy and fucks John's shit up entirely, which is really amusing. They replicate the NES Surfer screen as like the funniest thing Marvel's ever made, not named Mangog McKinney. That was pretty cool. And like, it's underwhelming. Most of it is just shooting lasers or them standing there and doing nothing visually while the mind fucks. I do like Surfer's reaction to the big dragon though. He's like, oh shit, we're not holding back at all of a sudden. And again, massive props to this season for overall giving us giant monsters in kaiju forms and shit. Coming in, most people, if they had seen this set of first 8 matchups as episodes, I'm sure most people would have expected only Ant-Man and Phoenix to get giant. But they let the Dragonborn have Odaving, Obito got the Ten-Tails and actually got to attack, Mizuga got the Iron Sand Daikaijin, and Manhunter got the Dragon form. I'm also sure that Bill Cipher will get to become giant and do the whole weird Mageddon pyramid thing. The only characters missing out on this are Rocket and Stitch, but I can sacrifice not seeing Rocket, but he's big, and Stitch, but he's this. If any of these characters I would have to choose to sacrifice big monster moment for, it would be those two. Small and cute is kind of a big part of the vibe. Also, as beautiful as the rigging here is, Surfer's mouth when he throws John is just really fucking funny to me. I can't unsee it now. But again, I just don't know what unique there is to say. What, do you want me to be like, well, Manhunter's right arm is down here, but in the next cut it's up. What a bad episode. I mean, yeah, that's an amusing continuity error, but I can't fill the episode up with those. Oh, I guess I like how they rendered the center of the sun. It looks like a great, huge fucking step up from how it looked in Beerus vs. Galaxia. Ripped that episode. And that one didn't look bad. I rewatched this fight multiple times now, and while I do like it well enough, it's really nothing special outside of the start and end. And I want my fights to have more than just a cool start and end. I want the actual fight itself to have some more substance to it. But this was kind of just completely average mostly, just with 1 or 2 neat shots and it looks pretty. It was certainly a lot better than the other 2 Marvel DC episodes we've gotten in my opinion. It's overall more engaging than Ant-Man vs. Atom, and it doesn't have a ton of just weird writing problems like Phoenix vs. Raven. Though I probably did like the banter in Ant-Man vs. Atom more, the more I look back, the more I realize that it's one of the only episodes this season where the characters bouncing off of each other actually have something to say about each other, instead of just their powers. I mean, that's what they talk about, but they have something to argue about, like their philosophies on science and stuff. They disagree on things. I probably would have liked a bit more dialogue in that episode. It just needed a bit more cooking, and I think the dialogue could have been excellent. This episode's dialogue mostly amounts to, "Let me probe your mind." No. And the ending. Hilariously, the conclusion hypes up Manhunter's telepathy powers, but they are fucking useless in this fight. But Surfer uses his, and yes, the pain inducement is a telepathy-based power, and it works amazingly, at least to his win. The conclusion is kinda weird though. I think it says a lot that they tiptoe around this one and don't really say it's a close fight. They say they both have counters for almost everything, but look, the fact that Manhunter's only advantage is that maybe he is comparable in strength, and his downsides are, he has less powers and he outright cannot win by any means. Surface's advantage, meanwhile, is that he can regenerate better, can maybe resist Manhunter's entire hacks kit, and has the power Cosmic, and his one downside is that some of his many powers can be resisted. But while this end screen kind of makes it seem super one-sided one way, it feels like the actual episode's evidence doesn't line up. The way they argue the telepathy thing is a bit weird. They bring up one character who has affected Surfer, and two characters that he resisted, and then just don't offer any sort of actual metric that has meaning for how they compare to Manhunter. Which I know the metric would probably just be affected this guy who resisted this, and that guy resists this, and blah blah blah, a chain tower. But for an example, another episode, Ultron vs. Sigma, sort of tackled a similar controlling the other character bit. In doing so, it brought up how Ultron Sigma'd an entire race of Sigma. And then they compare his intelligence to someone and even give a feat for the intelligence he's comparable to. Now, admittedly, they also didn't bring up what Sigma's feats of comparison were, but the simple idea of Ultron can do what Sigma does to an entire race of beings that are akin to Sigma, that's enough. This one, they just say, well, this one guy who can turn off Surfer's powers at any time and thus deactivate his resistances at will could mind hacks him, but this guy we won't tell you anything about couldn't do anything, and this person, powered by the Mind Gem that we'll continue not to explain the power of, because not explaining Infinity Gems is a core aspect of Death Battle, couldn't affect him either. And Manhunter's feats just don't get mentioned at all. The corner box here at least gives something for Surfer, but an audible explanation would have been nice. And then we come to how Surfer deals with Manhunter's regeneration. Instead of arguing that Surfer could just destroy him because he has massive fuck-off lasers and powers that are a star-level range, they just bring up essentially that Surfer has unlimited stamina. Huh? For power, they say he can destroy planets, Galactus-level threats, and vaguely accomplish anything. The last one's neat. Examples, please. And destroying planets? Really? John was compared to a being that made the multiverse in his rundown. Galactus level, cool, probably enough to balance out stats, but instead of bringing up actual powers and things that Surfer has done that can get around or overtax Manhunter's generation, they basically say that no matter what Manhunter does, Surfer will always have the power Cosmic, and then they don't explain how the power Cosmic's power actually gets around it. Like the fact, just bring up that he can atomize things, that's all you need. And they don't bring up that Manhunter can't do anything, audibly either. Don't get me wrong, I do not disagree with the outcome. In fact, I think they made it seem a lot closer than it really is. But the fact that one of Manhunter's biggest disadvantages is that he literally cannot win at all, probably should have gotten some lip service. That said, they also didn't really bring up any of the truly broken Silver Surfer regeneration feats. Here's Surfer coming back from all of his atoms being scattered across the galaxy, by the way. The time frame doesn't matter, he can time travel. The best they give him is being smashed into pieces, and I'm just gonna say, being smashed vaguely into pieces probably doesn't match up to, let alone surpasses, having regen so good that you need every atom of yourself destroyed to stay dead. Again, I do not disagree with the outcome, but they really didn't give Surfer the feats to back up their claims in the episode itself. Even the sidebar, that I thought would have something, doesn't. Matching the 6 Infinity Stones, whoop-de-doo, who knows what they consider those things capable of. Crashing into a Big Bang isn't that impressive, feels like they already have him above Universal if they're gonna argue he's a match to Manhunter. Hell, the panel used to represent his regeneration in the conclusion mind you, this panel is directly opposite Manhunter coming back from basically nothing, is Surfer getting shot by the Infinity Gems and visibly not being blown apart or needing to regenerate. This conclusion kind of ain't great. I feel like the arguments are weird, but this might just be because I've got a versus mind and I understand what they're saying to a more nuanced extent than I think some casuals who are thankfully not as deep in this rabbit hole of suffering would understand. It's just weird. So, what am I left with? An okay Martian Manhunter and Silver Surfer analysis, a standard but not bad fight with a really cool start and end, and honestly kind of a bad conclusion that I think doesn't have enough to back itself up within itself or within the analysis, even if I do agree with the outcome. Well, I have to say this is a good episode. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is pretty much standard fare, but Death Battle standard is good. It's not the most memorable episode outside of the ending of the fight, but at least it's got really no major flaws holding it back aside from that conclusion, which is a good thing, obviously. It's mostly good. Again, I don't know what to say. Start of the fight, cool. End of the fight, great. Most of the fight, just sort of okay. A couple really cool shots, boring analysis, and with a couple actually really funny jokes, and a conclusion that's not good. I can summarize my whole opinion like that, and I'm trying to find ways to talk about this and give my normal sort of in-depth analysis on an episode, and my criticisms and my praises, but I don't know what to say about this one. It is an episode. Next time, though, I am very excited for, but what the fuck was that trailer? I almost never talk about the next time trailers, and there's a good reason for that. Who gives a shit? And normally, they're just good. Rarely stand out, but rarely bad. The last one I remember distinctly sucking was Mara vs. Aizen, but this one, this is 4 clips of Discord and 3 clips of Bill Cipher with no pizzazz. No syncing up to the music, no dramatic musical sting, no cool parallels in the shots chosen, no smooth transitions, really nothing. And I get that it's kind of amusing to have a boring next time trailer for such a wild matchup, but it is still boring and not very funny. But like I said, who really gives a shit? The episode is going to fuck anyway, and I'm sure it's not going to be controversial in the slightest. Anyway, yeah, Martian Manhunter vs. Silver Surfer. Solid episode. Good night, everyone.
Oh god, I can't fucking stand it.
It's a fucking insult. This game should have been classic. Man, I was just pissing shit all over this fucking game. In fact, just thinking about it makes me feel like having an anal evacuation.
He looks so stupid. I mean, what the hell's wrong with him? He's just like, fuck. I guess that wasn't a good time to demonstrate. So there you go, shooting the rubber ducky, which doesn't die. Oh, fuck! Uh-oh, now I'm probably fucked. Oh, never mind. I guess I can go through those. I give up. I'm trying another stage.
I didn't know what the hell you were doing here.